Well, hey everybody, welcome back. It has been a while, and I apologize for that, but there's been a lot of little stuff going on. Nothing much to write home about, so no videos have been posted, but I think now it's time to give you the official introduction to RacerBenz. So today I'm going to show you kind of where it's at, and then we'll do a couple of little videos to get you caught up. But this is a 2001 CL500 Mercedes that was sitting outside a buddy's shop, and I said that car is just gonna, well, the windows didn't work and it was filling up with water, and it's like, this needs to be turned into a race car. So that's what we're doing. So CL500, but what we've done so far, and you're going to see just a little bit of the how we got here, and it's nowhere near close to done, so bear with me. But what it's got is Corvette C5 suspension cradles that have been grafted into the rear. Now again, it's just temporary to get everything fitted, located, and check it so it'll come into alignment before any final welding gets done. And then the front, we just got finished the other day. Again, not finished, but largely tacked in place, and we'll see some of the interesting things about how cool a fit this turned out to be. But so anyway, yeah, C5 Corvette suspension and wheels, and if you caught some of the interesting things going on in here, what in the world's going on, that's where the motor and trans is going to go. So it's getting converted to mid-engine, probably an LS with a Boxster 6-speed. And then I think maybe my favorite part is, notice the seat frame setup, center seated. So if you didn't catch it before, you will now. Clowns on the left and jokers to the right, and here we are with everything stuck in the middle. So this is stuck in the middle racing, because everything about the car is going to be stuck in the middle. So it is coming along. Anyway, I'm really happy with how it's coming out. Probably it's going to drop a bit in the back. It's got about 5.5 inches of ground clearance under the front cradle right now, so it seems a little bit raked in the front, relatively speaking. So I think it's got to come down in the back. But anyway, let's take you through a couple of episodes of how we got here. And oh, I guess I should explain more about the inside. Yeah, so the cage is done. This is all documented on Grassroots Motorsports, but pretty significant cage, 1.75 inch. The main crossbar there was cut out, and then this other base was stuffed in there. And yes, in order to make it mid-engine, it's going to have a complete firewall separating the engine compartment from the driver's compartment. And probably a piece of plexi is all we're going to run in here, but we got to completely seal off to the outside of any rear window we do. So it's going to be kind of fun. But it's a pretty cool cage, tipped up there with room in the much room as we could get in the center for the driver's head. And again, not completely done yet. The crossbar there for the steering setup is not quite figured out. It's just tacked in place to give us something to build off of. But really interesting car. It's mostly composite. I mean, there's certainly the skateboard, if you will. The skateboard part of it is steel, so the main chassis shock towers. But then if you look at all the other construction, you'll see there's a ton of rivets, and the rivets are aluminum panels that are riveted to steel components, and then the outside of the car is like either aluminum or composite. So like the whole deck lid is fiberglass. These panels are plastic. The doors are aluminum, and front fender's plastic, but the steel in the roof goes to about here and then down in the A-pillar. But pretty, relatively speaking, big car, but pretty lightweight. So a lot of interesting stuff going on, and it's gonna be pretty funny once it's going. Anyway, yeah, so giant wing, and I just think it looks great. Anyway, this is RacerBenz, so let's take you through a couple things about how we got here. Hope you enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to another day at the Red Barn, and this time we're going to be working on RacerBenz. And you saw last time just a quick introduction to the plan of the car, and now we're gonna go to work on the front suspension. So I ended up getting the Vette front frame rail clips, and this is just mocked up. It's sitting on a little cart to sort of simulate ride height, and I was not looking forward to grafting these frame rails into the car just because it's a big giant pain in the butt having done it in the back, and you know, anyway, was not looking forward to it and started doing some measuring, and it turns out that the Benz frame rails are essentially almost the same width as these in the right way, meaning that the cradle can be bolted to the bottom of the existing frame rails, and the nature of this cradle compared to the Benz, the front height may actually work out to be the exact right location to bolt to the bottom of the Mercedes frame rails. So long story short, rather than trying to fit this whole contraption up in there or rig something up to keep the A-arms in position while everything's being fitted, I just went ahead and got a separate cradle. And this gives you an idea of kind of where things are. So what we're going to be working up today is getting the front and back determination, so we know where center line of the wheel is. We can get it lined up with the center line of the car. But what's kind of cool is when you get down under here and you look at the widths, you can see that that hole is going to end up working out here. Hard to tell maybe, but this sits at a slight angle, so this is going to have, wherever this piece ends up, and it's going to end up back a little bit, but wherever this ends up, this pinch weld is going to have to be notched, and we're going to need a leveled piece of material put in there with a hole all the way up through the frame rail, and then probably sleeved, etc. And then the good news is the rear of the cradle, that, you know, the frame rail starts to drop down right in here. But the good news is this is going to be lower than this, so all we'll need to do is build a little extension with a pickup point here, and this cradle will go in, and it should be super tidy. Way better than trying to scab in, you know, these great big frame rails off the Vette. But, you know, and the Mercedes had a setup somewhat like this anyway, so I guess it's not surprising that this worked out, but it's just nice that, you know, the widths are okay. And the really cool thing is some quick measurement shows that this plane right here actually sits just outside of the Mercedes frame rail, so it may be possible to scab this into the Benz chassis. Yeah, we'll have to do something about this piece, but maybe cut it, get it fit, and then weld it back together for the upper shock pickup. But that is going to be the effort today, and you can see how nice that just might work out perfectly. So here we go. Okay, next day, and rather than take you through the boring measurement and cutting stuff, I went ahead and just did the work. Actually, Martin was here helping me out. You'll meet him in a little bit. And this is kind of where we ended up. So first, we did some magical radius calculating and wheel well openingness, and determined where we believe the center line of the wheel well opening is. And then did the same thing off of the Vette setup, where got everything aligned and shot across here with this in position to determine where the center line of the wheel is on the cradle. And then that was transferred, those measurements were transferred over onto this cradle. And without the lasers all turned on and everything, you can't really see, but I mentioned earlier that this little pinch well was going to have to be notched, and now this mount hole is right up against the other side of the frame, and this is essentially in position front to back. And you can see that we're going to need to build down to a mount here, but that's really straightforward. That should be no trouble at all. And this gives you a little bit of a view of how it's going to look on the inside. And you can see, you know, we're going to end up with a sleeved mount hole here. And then this one's not going to get sleeved all the way from the top. This one will end up having an open port where we can get a nut in here, and we'll just bolt that from, you know, from underneath. But it's coming right along. I think this is going to work out great. And, you know, I mean, we're plus or minus like a 1/4 inch, maybe 3/8, maybe a half, I don't know, of exactly the same height mounting point for the front, as I mentioned earlier. and you do the measurements with this car at 5 inches of ground clearance, you know, under the cradle base of the car, and you know, you can kind of see, if I can kind of get you a shot of, you know, ground level under the cradle all the way back to the back of the car. It's right where it needs to be. It sure is close. And you know, we may, worst case, you know, this will have to get a teeny bit of a notch or something with, you know, but that's so easy compared to what we did at the back. So I'm really happy with this. Now it's triple check all the measurements, get everything worked out, and get this thing bolted in. And then this thing will be on Corvette wheels. Okay, we're getting down to it here. So this is the approach. What I did is this right here is a pin, a locating pin that's part of the Vette cradle. It slides up into the Vette frame rail. This is actually what locates the cradle. There's one on each side. And so this is really what locates it. And in the Vette, these major fastening bolts, there's, you know, obviously 2 at the front, and then there's 2 at the back at that big boss. We haven't gotten to that yet. But these are actually quite sloppy in the Vette. So what I did is I made this plate and have a compression sleeve here, because we're going to weld another plate to the top to, you know, take care of the fact that I sliced a giant hole in the Benz frame to make all this stuff fit that way. But this is going to be the way it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and jack this thing up into place and kind of show you how it works. Now you're going to see that's that bolt that's hanging down there, that's put into the other Mercedes mounting point, and that's just going to give me something against which I can measure, you know, 4.5 side to side, get square. You know, yes, I'm making the assumption that the Mercedes cradle is completely square, but here's how this is going to work. Let's go ahead and we'll get this thing in place. All right, so not leveled, not nothing, just in place. But this will give you a look-see at what the upper section is going to do. So, hole drilled in the upper frame rail, and again, now I'm going to go back to, you can see with it bolted on that in the Mercedes original mount point, I've got some fore-aft movement, and now you can see how I can use those other bolts as locator measurement points to get me square in the car. And then these plates get tacked in, and remember, these plates have the locator hole in it for the Vette pin. And once this is all squared and that's in there, then I just have to play with up and down level, and then fabricate the rear pickup points. So I think this is going to work. And you can see up here, we'll just scab in another plate, weld it to the top of that, get it flat, and there's our bolt-in service. And then this will get welded. I'll probably plate the whole side of this thing and just go overkill on that. So I'm really happy with how this is coming along. Took a little bit to get to this point, but I think it's going to work. So keep at it. Okay, a bunch more good progress. In fact, we're almost ready to start the welding of the mounts in. So what do we got here? What I did was I made these plates that sit on top of, I'm going to take you for a bit of a wild ride, but here you can see this is the Vette mount. Obviously I need to get right size washers, but this is just mock-up time. And here you can see how I ended up cutting the pinch weld off, and then I actually had to cut the bottom of the Vette, or the Mercedes frame rail. Got to cut the bottom of the Mercedes frame rail out, because this section right here is flat, and then the frame rail transitioned to a little bit of a tip down going inward, and you can see just how much. It's flat here, but if you get back to here, you can see it's really got a decent tip. So anyway, that was all clearanced, and then I made these plates, and after poking around and looking at everything for a bit, I realized if I added a little bit of an extension and I put a slotted hole in here, I could actually bolt this plate to the factory Mercedes cradle pickup point. And so that's what I've done. And the slot allows this to be, you know, the whole contraption to be moved back and forth so I can get the center line correct. And then after taking a few careful measurements and shooting, you know, clocking this thing into the frame, or between the frame rails, you know, to get it oriented this way, and front and back for center line, I then made this little jig fixture. And it's a little tab with a hole in it that's exactly the same size as that bolt. It's almost a push fit. So it absolutely locates this thing fore and aft. And then it's sized with this little bent up tab so that it, with this tab, with this plate slid all the way back and interfering with it, it bumps right into it on both sides. And since these were plasma cut, and these were plasma cut, and those holes are factory Mercedes holes, with this thing shoved all the way back and then leveled to the car, this cradle is in place. And so now I can start the process of, you know, I can tack this in, and now you can see what I'm gonna have to build at the backside, right? I got to connect from the frame rail, the Benz frame rail. Got to crawl around under all these bars and everything, sorry. I got to connect something that comes down and picks up these rear mounting points. But there it is. I mean, that almost could be mistaken for factory, you know, because it's nowhere near like the rear with all the extensions we're gonna have to make back there and all that. But I'm really happy with how that turned out. And it's ended up a little bit higher in the chassis than we thought it might, because we couldn't tell. I couldn't get the real measurements until all this stuff was clearanced. So it's probably up, you know, maybe 3/8, which is fine, because, you know, if I rake the front down a teeny bit, that's no big deal. And yeah, I'm psyched. Psyched. You know, so now it's quadruple check all the measurements, make sure that everything is nice and lined up, wheel center line wise. And then that gets welded in, those get done. And then the fun part is gonna be getting these upper A-arm mounts and the shock mount worked out. And I think what I'm gonna do, now that I've looked at this a little bit more, I may change my mind, but what I think I'm gonna do is take this piece off the cradle and make a fixture that bolts to the bottom of this, which would be the exact same place that the cradle would go, and same at the front mount, and build something that comes up and picks up these mounting points exactly. So I went ahead and plasma cut, drew up a little cardboard design, and then plasma cut these three, sorry about that, these three plates for the rear mount. So we've got, that's just an outer plate or an inner plate inside the car. And then there's a lower plate down there that you can see that the nut and bolt come up through, and kind of hard to see, but yeah, maybe I can get down in here. There's an outer plate that will edge weld and plug weld to the side of the Benz chassis, just like this inner plate will. And anyway, so we got the rear mounts, and those are bolted up. And so those were sized based on, you know, this being leveled this way and everything being put in square. And so the rear mounts are done. Then what I did was I made a set of these fixture jigs, and for, you know, simple enough design. And here's what it looks like after all the carnage. So here it is. You know, it bolts. You know, these components bolted onto the bottom of the Vette cradle. And again, this is or the Vette frame rail rather. This position in space and this position in space have been duplicated on the Benz. This is that rear drop I just showed. And then this ends up being the same location as the, you know, the bottom of the Benz frame rail, where that little plate with the locator pin, you can see here in the Vette frame rail, that's where that locator pin goes. But anyway, here it is. It's not obviously bolted on, but this gives you an idea of what it did. And this is post slicing out the mounts that I needed to move over onto the Benz. But you can see what it did is it just picked up the locating points of the outside most A-arm bolts, or you know, the locations, and then that was bolted onto the chassis, and that ended up just locating this whole component in space. And then I've just, you know, started doing some triangulation of plates. I'm going to box the top in, and you can see, you know, we've got this plate's now in holding that compression sleeve. Anyway, and so that's what located these in relationship to this. And then, as you saw, I just went in and then bolted the A-arm, assembly back on, and the spindle, and started checking everything, and it turned out it was in the right place, so it started getting welded in, and that's what you're seeing right there. So that's how we got to where we got to. These worked out great, one for each side, and located things nicely. And then, as you saw, I lopped the tops of the suspension towers out because those are no longer necessary, and I'll figure out what I want to do there to close those off. So that gets current with the Vette cradles being in the car, and kind of gets you current with the whole project. The next thing we got to do, though, is finish this rear section, get the rear cradles done. And what you can see now that was different than the intro video was it turned out that the one passenger side Vette frame rail was bent, and I didn't know that until after it was tacked in this sort of situation, and tried to get the thing to align, and I couldn't get enough camber. It wouldn't come into spec on this side because this piece was tipped a teeny bit, and it was forcing that upper A-arm out. So I sourced another frame rail, got that positioned yesterday, got everything measured, and got this one tacked back in place. So you can see the remnants of the homemade alignment string job, just to make sure that with the toe getting set and the camber set on both sides, that the wheel wells, man, this place is messy, too many things going on, but that the wheel in the rear is positioned okay in that wheel well, and it looks like it is. So a couple more checks of all those measurements and ensuring that that thing's in there square and all that good stuff, and then it'll be a question of tying these rails into the Benz frame, both in the front and in the back. And then we can finish up. We'll probably bring some cage tubes down as well. Those are just in there temporarily to help locate things. But that gets you current. That gets you current with RacerBenz. So I'll start doing a better job of documenting this build for the channel. And again, hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. And thanks for watching. Take care. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.